Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Good morning. I'm Bonnie Kovacic, the Director of Volunteers here at Crosspointe Church, and I wanted to take a few moments this morning to give some heartfelt thanks and recognition to the many volunteers. If you're on a volunteer team at Crosspointe, you know who you are, and I just want you to know we value you, and we appreciate the time that you take out of your day to serve the people at our church. You might be on a team that keeps us safe out in that parking lot and directs traffic and helps with parking. You might be greeting us when we walk in the door and making us feel welcome. You might be checking in new families when they come in and taking them to the appropriate areas to sign in their children. You might be in the hospitality team making sure we have hot coffee in the morning. You could be at the Connect desk where people go to ask questions about Crosspointe and you're there to answer. You could be on the chair team setting up and taking down chairs. You could be behind the scenes on our IT team so that when things go wrong that nobody knows how to fix, you're always there to do it. You also might be on the stage playing an instrument, singing vocals with us in our worship team. You also might be serving with preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school students as a helper or as a small group leader with them. You also might be on our community events team where you work with the community garden, with Family Promise, with Habitat for Humanity. You may be leading life groups at our church. You also might be on our care teams that help when our members need a little bit of extra help, sending cards, providing meals, helping with transportation. I may have left out some of the teams that we have, but I want you to know whatever team you're serving on, you are appreciated. I hope you have a great day.
My friend, have you lost hold again? Do you feel like somebody else? Have you got fire in your mind that keeps you up at night? I watch you run around head down and disregard it. I see you running from your shadow. How can I ask you please to stay? You can run till you've got nothing left, but we'll still end up face to face. be afraid of how you feel. Don't look for life in past or future. Look right at it dead in the eye. After this moment, there's a new one. Be where you are. Be where you are. And I know that it gets lonely and dark and it feels hard. And I know that you want to close off your heart. You've been using all this noise to avoid meeting your mess. You don't have to work so hard. Just stop and take a breath and be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are.
Jesus said, "Therefore, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash."
I will build my house, whether storm or drought, on the rock that does not move. I will set my hope in your love, O Lord, and your faithfulness will prove that you are steadfast. Steadfast by the word you spoke. All the starry host are called out by name each night. In your watchful care, I will rest secure as you lead us with your light. 'Cause you are steadfast, steadfast. You are steadfast, steadfast. I will not trust in the strength of kings. On your promise I will stand. I will shout for joy, I will raise my voice. Hallelujah to the Lamb. You are steadfast, sense of holiness. You are still God.
You are steadfast, steadfast. You are steadfast, steadfast. You are steadfast, steadfast.
Hi Crosspointe, it's nice to be with you here today. I want to let you know about a few things. First, as you might have already heard, small group signups for both students and adults are happening right now. And today is the last day to sign up for adult small groups. There's options online, in person, short-term, long-term. Some groups focus on service, some on studies, some just gathering. And also at 6:30 this evening at the Crosspointe building, it's going to be full of students and adult volunteers because our amazing middle school and high school ministries are kicking off their year tonight. You can still sign up for a small group if you have a student, and you can also come this evening at 6:30 to drop off your high school student, your middle school student, to get more information. If you're a parent of a middle or high school student, as you drop off your student tonight, we invite you to join us in the coffee shop area at Crosspointe to meet some of our family ministry team to connect with other parents. Adult groups, student ministry, they're all great ways to be involved. But more importantly, they're really great for building community, for having great conversations, to getting to know people outside of Sunday mornings, and for students to have adults that speak into their lives. If you want to find out more about adult groups, go to crosspointe.org/groups. If you'd like details about student ministry, you can go to crosspointe.org/middle school or crosspointe.org/high school. Also, if you want to partner with us financially and support the work that Crosspointe does and that you do as a community, you can find out more about that at crosspointe.org/contribute, or you can text crosspointenc to 77977. Now I want to talk with you about something a little bit more serious. You've heard us talk often about the housing crisis in our area. And week after week, we have the privilege of interacting with incredible people who have found themselves in unimaginable situations. Their stories are not unfamiliar. And due to confidentiality, and sometimes at their request, we don't get to share specific details of their stories very often. And I know it sounds a little bit like, trust us, we promise this is true, but it is. And it reiterates to us over and over again, the problem of affordable housing is so real in our area. It affects so many. We've met individuals and families who've moved to the Triangle with promises of work, only to find out when they get here that the cost of living here doesn't match up with the work they've been promised, and they're unable to support themselves and their families. We meet these families and individuals through our partnerships with Family Promise, through congregants who've met them living in their cars in our local parking lots, through Crosspointe assistance requests, through referrals. Other people we see are single parents with children in school or preschool trying desperately to make ends meet while they work multiple jobs, often that just don't even offer health care. They're working, they're parenting their children, which we know is a full-time job already, trying to keep food on the table, to get their children's school supplies and clothing, to keep electricity on, to keep a roof over their heads. Many of them work up to 40 to 60 hours per week. And what are families and parents like these supposed to do when all of that is simply not enough? We've met others who've grown up in our community, who've cared for others in our community, but due to a medical crisis or an unexpected divorce, have found themselves with little to nothing, battling rental companies who, now that the COVID moratorium for evictions is up, refuse to work with renters who have nowhere else to go and just offer them eviction notices. The wait for affordable homes is often several months, up to several years. And often it's required for a new place to have up to 2 months rent in advance, which is just impossible for so many. And many rent costs have risen over 45% in the last few years, while paychecks have remained the same. Regardless of job interviews, qualified resumes, the hours with career consultants and placement organizations, many of these individuals simply can't find work, and especially not work that pays enough to pay bills while living in Wake County. Sometimes ageism is a factor. A person may have an incredible resume, but the company is looking for someone younger. Or maybe a mom's been out of the workforce for several years while taking care of her children and now finds herself the sole provider with no current experience. There are so many reasons for the need for quality, affordable housing, and very, very few of them have anything to do with a person's unwillingness to contribute. These families and individuals and so many others that we see week after week go to local organizations like Crosspointe, the White Oak Foundation, and others to ask for assistance. And these are not distant situations. These are individuals and families that are often just a few steps from our door. They're our neighbors. They've taught our children. They've cared for our aging. They've contributed to our community in so many ways. But because of systems that are not set up to support individuals in their situations, they've found themselves in situations they thought they never would be in. They have to put their human dignity on the shelf and ask for help. Housing is also a determinant of health. When securing housing becomes a constant need, it's an added stressor that so many of us don't ever have to think about. But yet imagine if you weren't sure where you or your family would have to sleep in the next week or tomorrow, what else would matter? Stress levels rise, heart conditions occur, sleep suffers, mental health suffers, children suffer in school. When all of your money goes toward housing, there's little to none left for healthy food, for necessary medical care, for utility bills, for continuing education. There is no internet. There is no Netflix. There is no Little League or music lessons. There's no tutoring. There's no birthday parties. This is a huge problem in our neighborhoods that will not be solved simply through the paying of bills. We will continue to pay bills, but bills come every month, and there are not enough nonprofits in our county to pay them all. We must be in charge of changing the systems. We must be a part of celebrating development and growth in our communities, while at the same time recognizing that often new businesses and new corporations and development, while they're exciting for some and mean profit for some, for others, it means they're being pushed out and they're being left out. And from everything that I know, this is not the way of Christ. And we have to be a part of advocating for a better way, a way that supports everyone in our community, for basic housing for everyone who wants it. And we also must recognize and change the narrative in our own heads and recognize the humanity in all of our neighbors. Affordable housing does not mean a lack of safety. Affordable housing does not mean lesser humanity. It does not mean lazy. It means access to something that should be considered a basic human right. It also means that we might need to step out of our comfort zones to advocate for those who cannot advocate for themselves. Maybe because they're too busy working that third job trying to pay their rent. And this is a lot, I know, but it is important. Our church community is presented with these stories all the time. And they're not just stories. They represent true and real individuals. And it may even describe some of you. There is no perfect solution. But we're smart people, and we're able to solve hard problems. And if this is something that you would like to be a part of, advocating for, let us know. But this isn't an issue that Crosspointe staff just tackles alone. There are multiple organizations that we want to partner with in order to help solve this problem. And it's something that should bother all of us at our core. As we sit in our homes, may we remember that this is something not guaranteed for so many of our neighbors. So what can we do? Well, first off, we need more people thinking about this and talking about this and advocating for solutions. So if you want to talk more about how we might do more, email me at community@crosspointe.org so we can continue the conversation. Thanks, Crosspointe.
Many years ago, I had the pleasure of spending a day in a Kenyan village with a bunch of Kenyan pastors. They came from miles away in every direction. And I was there to train them, which in hindsight, that gets a little stranger every time I think about it. Most of them were older than I was, and none of them did I live with in order to understand the context in which they pastored. And I think I had a general awareness of these facts, but that didn't stop me from maybe speaking a little too absolutely on what pastoring and church means. When it was over, a woman came up to me and asked me about whether the Bible taught that polygamy was wrong. Many of the women in the region were and are married to men who have other wives. And as usual, the situation is not men married to women who have other husbands. It never works that way. So my answer came remarkably quickly. I told her that marriage biblically was between a man and a woman. I knew that there were multiple wives in the Bible sometimes, but when it came down to it, marriage like mine is what God intended. And she got this heavy look on her face and walked away. And I had this awful feeling about it. I couldn't put my finger on why. Well, later it was explained to me that regardless of how anybody feels about patriarchy or economics or any of that, and that's all incredibly important, and I have thoughts and feelings about it. That's an important conversation. But the real life issue was women like her fare far better in that context when they marry into a family, to a man with other wives and a network of their families. Far better than if they remain unmarried or wait for a circumstance that looks more like mine. Agree with it or not, that's just how it was explained to me by Kenyans. But I answered the question as one expected to have the right answer, regardless of the reality into which I was speaking. So I answered absolutely from an interpretation of parts of the Bible. And in doing so, I ignored several things at once. I ignored biblical evidence that contradicted me. Most of the married people in the Bible don't have marriages anything like mine. I ignored the fact that I didn't understand this woman's life or context at all. So I couldn't be speaking from wisdom. I was just a human Bible app. I just spit out a verse or two. And I was speaking on behalf of the truth, despite really not knowing what that was. I just had simple answers and no real understanding. See, I thought I was supposed to know, and I carry with me a self-serving bias, so I put myself forward as somebody with knowledge and certainty. But I didn't know, and I didn't know that I didn't know. I was operating on what I have come to observe a lot of people operate on. I was motivated by a desire to have my mind made up about God things, because I thought people who take God and the Bible seriously are right. And so I was the one who knows what the Bible says, and I reduced a human being's life decisions to fit inside my insulated take on some select Bible passages, and I burdened her. I didn't do her any good. And today I want to talk about the gift of coming to know that we don't know. And I hope it's an encouragement, but for some of us, we're going to work through a feeling of being unnerved and even threatened a little bit by it before we can be encouraged by it. In the 3rd chapter of John, a man named Nicodemus comes to talk to Jesus at night. He starts flattering Jesus for being this great teacher. And Jesus responds by stepping over this flattery with this awful icebreaker. He says, "Very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above." This is where we get the phrase born again, but it's actually born from above. So Nicodemus, whom I assume thought to himself, okay, Jesus turns water into wine, but he's terrible at small talk. He expresses his confusion about what Jesus has said. He takes it literally. He's like, what am I supposed to do? Return to my mother's womb and have her give birth to me all over again? Jesus clears up nothing at this point. He starts painting more pictures about flesh only being able to give birth to more flesh. We have to experience rebirth, to experience something more than merely existing. And he tells Nicodemus, don't be astonished that I said to you, you must be born from above. The wind, and the word wind here is the Greek word pneuma. It's a term that can be translated wind or breath or spirit. The wind blows where it chooses to blow, and you hear the sound of it, but you don't know where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone who was born of the Spirit, pneuma, same exact word. Don't be surprised that I'm speaking to you this way, Nicodemus. The wind, the Spirit, is not reducible to an idea that you could have any final authority over. You don't create predictable doctrines about wind. It just does what it does without explanation. Or perfectly coherent absolutes. You can hoist a sail, you can hide in your basement from it, but wind is not subject to our beliefs or our arguments. Nicodemus said to him, how can these things be? And Jesus answered him, are you the teacher of Israel and yet you don't understand these things? This last part really heightens it for me. Nicodemus is a teacher. He's a member of a council that makes rulings based on the Bible. He knows a lot of stuff. He knows what the scriptures contain and what they don't contain. He knows the laws, the stories, all in the original languages, mind you. You would lose every debate you had with Nicodemus. But according to Jesus, that doesn't make this teacher knowledgeable, as knowledgeable as he and everyone thinks he is. And don't miss out on an opportunity here to imagine what this is like to be Nicodemus, to know things, to thank God for having them revealed to you, only to have Jesus say to you, you realize for all your ability to answer and quote, you don't actually know the substance of what you teach. Nicodemus apparently knows about the scriptures, what his tradition permits him to believe about the scriptures, but he's unacquainted with the depths of real experience, where wind blows, where water flows, where real life happens, the stuff God has always prioritized. I just watched a short documentary on the life and work of Jackie Chan. How many documentaries would I have to watch before you would believe I'm Jackie's friend, or that now I'm a stuntman? You would instinctively know that I'd have to experience far more than that, than knowing about him to make claims like that. Well, why wouldn't we hold anyone else, pastors, to the same standard when they claim to know God's mind, God's will? Jesus says, so you're a teacher and you don't understand rebirth. You know about things expertly, but you don't know the experience of human beings transformed by love and grace and justice and peace. You've mastered a map, but you don't have any real knowledge of the terrain. Think about this. This was Jesus' chance to tell a teacher exactly what to teach, to explain God to Nicodemus. He's the Son of God. So Jesus, resolve it. What's God like? Wind. Unpredictable, easy to ignore or enjoy entirely, impossible to contain in your church or your synagogue or your brain. Wind. Something you experience in the real world. Something I can't actually teach you, but can help you wake up to as you walk. I mean, on one level, this is maddening, but on another, it's a gift. It's a complete reset for those of us who thought we were supposed to figure out not only what the Bible says, but then we had to believe whatever we came up with. Many of us thought we were supposed to become part of this elite group of truly devoted folks who have cracked the code of the Bible. No one else has, but we did. Our team did. And so we know when the end of the world is coming and which politicians are the beast from Revelation and how to get God to actually answer your prayers and whether or not there's a stegosaurus on Noah's Ark. And hear Jesus say to Nicodemus and to you and I, you don't know what you think you know. You don't understand things as well as your ability to quote the Bible suggests that you understand things. You aren't in as much intellectual control as it feels like that you are. But you were never expected to. Being right isn't a command to obey or a fruit you can produce. You and I can only be right in how we live toward one another. Enjoy this truth. You're wrong about almost everything, and it doesn't count against you. Now, I know that might not bode well at the office or for that civics test you might have coming up, but as it pertains to the fundamental important things in life, you're wrong in almost every conclusion you've drawn. That's a gift. Being right, as it turns out, isn't a command to obey or a fruit we can produce. Now, some of us will hear this voice, and what we're hearing is, well, you don't know what you think you know. It's a shaming, finger-pointing voice. Step back. You're not as smart as you think you are, stupid. That's not the voice of love and freedom. That's the shaming voice that made you and I misunderstand faith as a quest for being right in the first place. That's the voice that says, if you're not right, you're going to be left out. That if you don't believe correctly, you'll be punished. You'll be hurt forever. The voice that says, whoever understands and makes up their mind correctly, they're the winner, while most people will get it wrong and lose forever. That's the threatening, ultimatum-giving voice that warns that anyone saying, I don't know, I'm not sure about that, I've changed my mind about that, I don't actually believe that, those people are weak. They're susceptible to bad faith. They're people who don't try hard enough. So hear this again. You don't know what you think you know. And not because you're deficient, but because you're generally incapable of knowing. That's not a judgment. That's an observation. That's not shame. That's a gift. A Christian scholar called Origen, he lived in the 2nd and 3rd century, he once said, "For whatever be the knowledge which we are able to obtain of God, either by perception or reflection, we must of necessity believe that he is by many degrees far better than what we perceive him to be." Whatever we come up with as a conclusion about God, we have to remember that we're off by a laughable margin, always. God is far better and more than we imagine. Imagine a 5-year-old describing the work of a Michelin star chef. You know, the food was orange and red and the napkin was like a big blanket. He hasn't even scratched the surface and couldn't be expected to be any closer than that. I don't know about you, but I think it's hilarious to think of people making absolute statements about God and the universe. We can't even see the back of our own head. This is a gift. Being right isn't a command we can obey. It's not a fruit we can produce. And what a lot of people reflexively do here is say, well, but we have His Word. We have the Bible. That tells us plainly what to do and what to believe. And God's Spirit gives us understanding if we seek it sincerely enough. Okay, I understand this sentiment. I used to hold this sentiment. But of the objections I grew to have about it, why doesn't everyone who says this turn out to believe the same things? Because they don't. Find a church website that insists God's word can be understood and parsed rightly by those who have sincere faith, and then compare it with another church website that says the same thing. Those two churches don't hang out. And I'll take it a step further, and I don't mean to sound judgmental here, but I want us to observe this together. The people who most loudly declare that the Scriptures have the absolute last word on reality and on the life of a Christian and how they live and their character and their thought, those who quote it as though they think it pertains to complex realities. They refuse to adapt their thinking and understanding of that text in light of any new evidence that comes in. Those such people, they don't necessarily remind us of Jesus any more than anyone else. They don't have a unique reputation for being the people the rest of us want to be. In my experience, if I may speak frankly, they're the ones that send the nastiest, most arrogant emails. And again, I don't want to single out anybody for judgment. I want to examine the fruit of those who single themselves out for being right. Big claims demand big evidence and all that. Do the people who nominate themselves as being right also have a lock on the reputation for being the most like Jesus? The Jesus they claim to know the best? Of course not. We're all a mess. We're all wrong. And we aren't expected to get much of anything right. So let me use this point to make a segue here. Everything I have just said about God is in its way true of neighbor and enemy and everyone else too. In fact, loving God and loving people might very well have at its roots the embracing of this fundamental fact. We just don't comprehend the object of our love, and we never will. In a different but related way to our not ever having God figured out, we also cannot possibly grasp what it's like to be another human being. We can observe their behaviors and form an opinion. We can see certain traits and group them in with others that we like or dislike or love or hate or have a general indifference about. But we cannot know what it's like to be another person. What it was like for them from the very beginning, in their first formative minutes of being born. What it was like for them on that 15th Thursday of their 4th year on earth, and how that day still directs how they respond to people shouting or the idea of money or the smell of an exhaust or mornings. We can't ever know how their past is still shaping their present right in front of us. We can't ever fully appreciate what the people around us have inside them, inspiring them, weighing them down, making them trust, making them feel alone. My neighbor and I stopped on the road last week to let our dogs say hi. And while we were talking, I asked if he had any big plans for the weekend, and he explained that his wife is traveling up north with her mother to pick out a headstone for her recently deceased father. Her mother's in her late 90s and is starting to struggle with Alzheimer's and couldn't do it by herself. It was going to be such a hard trip. But he was staying behind and staying in because he told me his best friend since the 70s had just fallen and is now paralyzed. And this after his other good friend is in week 2 of a coma. He got bit by a mosquito and contracted West Nile. And I could see how tired he was. I told him, hey, I'm right next door if you need any help. And I was struck by how much ache was coming from just the next house over. And then I realized, well, I also know about some difficulties in the house over there, and the neighbor on the other side, that's tough. And I've recently discovered something that's happening in the house across the street. This sample size, this data set is so small. It's one cul-de-sac. And then I thought, well, there's other people in town, of course, who have their own hard stories, and they're going to see my neighbors at the store or wherever, and they're not going to know about any of this stuff unless they stop and remember how hard everybody has it, how everyone's doing the best they can with the experiences that they're having and the tools that they have to process those experiences. All those other people, they're going to be ignorant, and they're going to be certain and incurious about my neighbors. They're going to forget that they don't know, and they're going to judge and engage like they do know, and they're going to get it all wrong. I was just made aware of the death of a middle schooler last week. Absolutely tragic. I can't comprehend it. And I was thinking, you know, a year from now, that mother is going to be at a Burger King or a hair salon or something, and all those emotions are just going to surprise her, and they're going to come out, and they're going to spill out on others, and somebody's going to get that on video, and they're going to call her a Karen, and they're going to put it online, and the rest of us are going to shake our heads at it. They won't know that they don't know. And in their ignorance, they're going to speak and act like people who assume that they do know, with certainty and incuriousness, rather than with love and gentleness and patience and even an imperfect desire to make space because it's another human being. And that human being is probably going through something. See, I'm becoming more and more convinced that to grow spiritually is to become more and more aware and accepting of our ignorance. I really did used to genuinely, fervently believe that to mature was to become more and more knowledgeable and sure, to contain inside myself more and more truth about God and the world and people, to have answers. In fact, I not only believed it, but others praised me for me appearing to have those things. And yeah, I've learned some things. But some of you know exactly what I mean when I say that the paradox of growing up in deepening faith is that you actually wake up to how ignorant we are, how incredibly, irreversibly clueless we all are. And the only response that we can bring to this awareness is humility and kindness. In science, the sustained awareness that you don't know things is called epistemological humility. Epistemology is a fancy way of describing, the theory of what can be known and how you could even know it. So epistemological humility is a humility about what can be known. It's something like a virtue, but not just for sciences. It's a humility that says, when I gain knowledge of something, I recognize that that knowledge is being interpreted by me, fitted together by me, filtered by me, the observer. So whatever conclusions I'm drawing them while I recognize my ability to grasp things in themselves. I can only grasp a thing as I take it, not as it actually is. Our knowledge is always provisional and incomplete. New evidence should and will change my mind if I remain honest. Nothing is off the table to be rethought if I'm truly sincere about seeking truth and remaining humble. And so this humility keeps me open to what's actually true, and it keeps me considerate and kind with others. A lack of this humility, though, makes us say things like, well, I don't care what they say or what they're experiencing. My mind is made up. I've got a verse. I've got this tradition. I don't care about evidence to the contrary. I refuse to engage with anyone who doesn't honor my beliefs. What I'm saying is a lack of this humility, it appears devout, but it's actually a problem. It causes problems. It can even cause harm. We're seeing it in people who refuse to allow their children to learn about science and history unless it comports to the story that they've already decided has to be true. And they won't listen. In fact, their refusal to listen, to change their minds, is part of how they communicate how faithful they think that they're being. So it's a fearful lack of humility that results in children being miseducated about disease and dinosaurs and geology and space, the climate, American history, race, what it means to be gay or lesbian or trans, because of the idea that they aren't permitted to learn from reality where wind and water move. They have to hang on to ideas that someone else put in their head. And so they're so bent on being those who already know that they don't know that they don't know. And so what we get for it and is a society unnecessarily ill-equipped to live and engage in the real world, God's world. We're also seeing people often referred to as Christian nationalists, quoting the Bible as they go, arming themselves to the teeth to defend their picture of the nation, trying to force others to conform to their beliefs. They pride themselves on not incorporating new information or new perspectives, but defending themselves from them. They don't want the truth, and they certainly don't seek to wake up to the kingdom of love. They want to be right. They want to end up right. And in fact, if you ask them, they already are, because to be wrong is to be bad. This isn't the Spirit of Christ. This is fear and an overconfident, weaponized lack of humility. And it's dangerous. And we renounce it, but I don't think anyone will change their mind by arguing with them about the Bible or Constitution or facts, because it's not rooted in facts. It's rooted in the fear. It's having an identity really rooted in fear of being right or else. I think the only way their minds will change, the only way any of our minds will change, is when they see the beauty of a life marked by peace, inclusion, intelligence, kindness, collaboration, the suspension of anxiety, and love. We're made to be drawn to that. It's our essential nature, buried under fears about believing the wrong things. The people who move in step with the Spirit, the wind, the breath, these are people who know some things, sure, but they know them in the humble context of those who understand you can only really see reality through a peephole. They have discernment about God and about people and all kinds of stuff, but they hold this discernment humbly as students, knowing they're largely incapable of interpreting well anything or anyone that they come in contact with. So they choose kindness and patience with others because they know how ignorant they are about how hard it must be to be someone else. And they know they want that same consideration aimed at themselves. People who are learning to live in step with the Spirit are learning to be students of life. No longer life's explainer or truth's defender, but students. We see Nicodemus, by the way, 2 more times in John's Gospel. The 3rd time is at the end where he's become a Jesus follower. But the 2nd time, a few chapters after his head-spinning conversation with Jesus about rebirth and what he actually knows, this 2nd time, you see a trait starting to emerge. In John chapter 7, we read, the temple police went back to the chief priests and Pharisees, and the Pharisees asked him, why didn't you arrest Jesus? They're like, you had him. You botched an opportunity to shut Jesus down? What happened? So the police answer, never has anyone spoken like this. I mean, we were going to take him into custody, just like you said. But you should have heard how he talked about life and God and what's actually happening in the world and how we can live in it. I mean, we've read the Bible, of course, but this guy is tuned into far more than something you read and memorize. Then the Pharisees replied, surely you've not been deceived too, have you? Has any of the authorities or Pharisees believed in him? Have you noticed that none of us believe him? But this crowd, which doesn't know the law like we do, they're accursed. That's why people are believing this heretic. They don't know like we know. Nicodemus, who had gone to Jesus before and who was one of them, the Pharisees, he asked them, our law doesn't judge people without first giving them a hearing to find out what they're doing, does it? And they replied, surely you're not also from Galilee, are you? Search, and you will see that no prophet is to arise from Galilee. Go read the Bible, and then you'll see what we already know. Do you hear how incurious they are? Do you hear how they know what the Scriptures say? They know what God thinks. They know what a nation is allowed to become. They are the ones who know. They know who has value and who doesn't. They know who's cursed and who isn't. They have all the Bible verses to support their views. But then Nicodemus, who's been marinating for weeks on what Jesus said to him, maybe for months at this point, he's realizing there is far more to life than our right-sounding and defensible conclusions. And so Nicodemus is the one that says, wait. You guys realize we're ignorant here. We haven't listened yet. What if we stopped drawing conclusions and listened? What if we humbled ourselves and admitted right now that we, the knowers, we don't actually know anything about him, nor do we know all the people that you're calling cursed just because they disagree with you. Can you see what's taking root in Nicodemus? You could call it epistemological humility. You could call it a growing awareness of his own blessed ignorance, which makes space for wisdom and love. You could call it a growing acceptance of wind. You could simply call it faith. And this same path of faith is laid out before all of us right now. No matter what we think we know or don't know, it's the same path. And I cannot figure out how to put this into words to tell you how strongly I feel about this, how intensely I want to get this across to you. But I want you to hear me say this. I cannot prove anything in the Bible. I'm a Bible teacher and I can't prove any of it. And I don't believe everything in it happened the way I'm supposed to believe that it did. And I'm perfectly comfortable with this uncertainty and ambiguity. I know some of you won't be. I didn't used to be, but I am. Because I've grown more and more aware that I don't know half of what I thought I knew yesterday. I'm wrong about everything. I don't know how to truly be right about anything. But here's what I believe is in the wind. Every time I love, I'm right. Every time I choose my kindness, I'm right. Every time we are kind and considerate, we're right. Every time we pause, remember how ignorant we are about what it's like to be any other person or creature other than ourselves, we are right. Every time we stick up for someone else who's stuck, due to their own decisions or due to the world around them crushing them like a bug, we're right. Even when we attempt that imperfectly and clumsily, we're right. Every time we say, I don't know, but I'm with you, we're right. Every time we decide to allow something from above to be reborn in us, to reprioritize our energies away from ourselves for the sake of others, moving in step with the self-giving wind of Christ, for all the other stuff we're hopelessly wrong about. In that, we are right. I am infinitely curious about the universe. I love learning. I know some things. And you are curious about things, and you love learning about certain things, and you know a ton, probably far more than I do. But we're wrong, to one degree or another, about all of it. But it's okay, because being right isn't a command we can obey or a fruit that we can produce. You and I can only be right in how we live toward each other. And so we can be right in our kindness, our patience, our gentleness, our inclusion, and our love. So, may we dare to know that we don't know. May we accept this unknowing with humility, and may we be reborn into a life that seeks to get Christ's love right. Amen.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspoint.org/care. And welcome home.